cowboys are out in the desert, completely lost, trying to find their way back to civilization, haven't eaten anything for days, haven't had anything to drink. They ran out of their water that day. It's dire straits for them. Over the ridge, they see a tree, and it looks like there's strips of bacon hanging from the tree. They run up to the tree and immediately get shot 100 times. It wasn't a bacon tree. It was a hambush. Hey kids, Adam here. Today I'm going to go over all of my parallel processing for drums that I use in my mixes. So you get a mix, you get the drums sounding really good. They just don't really cut through. They are not punchy enough. There's not enough thump on the kick. There's not enough crack on the snare. What do? Do you reach for more EQ? Do you reach for another compressor? Probably not. I'm going to show you 7 different send tracks that I'm using and I have used and kind of built over the course of my mixes. I want to give a shout out to Brandon Heyer over at the Noise Floor AV. He put a series out a couple of years ago of what he called Mix Minute, which is 1-minute videos, included all of his drum sends. I kind of started with those as a basic template and then built my own around my mixes and the style of music that we do. I will put a card here for his playlist. He actually changed channels now. He has one specifically for the Mix Minute. There's some great stuff on there. It's what it says. It's 1-minute mix tips, usually featuring a different plugin or a style or a technique. So go check those out. In the meantime, let's head over to Reaper and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about and show you how to make your drums sound big, huge, punchy, and cut through your mixes. All right, here we are on Reaper. This song is called Information by the band Too Far Down. Featured it in a video that's up here. It's a band I was in over 20 years ago, and this is one of the songs off the album that we put together back then. So take a listen to the drums. All of the parallel processing is off. I do have EQ, compression, saturation, some reverb, some other things on all of the individual tracks, as well as some compression and EQ on the drums folder itself, but I don't have any parallel tracks or sends or aux tracks or bus tracks or whatever you want to call them in play here. Listen to just the drums alone. I mean, they sound okay, but there's missing some thump in the kick. There's missing some crack in the snare. Now the overheads are a bit loud here, and things are overall just kind of a bit thin because I've mixed them with my parallel processing. But take a listen with all the parallel tracks on to the difference in the drums. I'll do it before and after so you can hear it without me talking between. So before. Now, the first thing you're going to notice, there's a definite volume difference. I tend to use parallel compression in drums for volume and body and definition. It's just kind of the way that I've learned to mix. I know a lot of people say you should keep the volume levels the same and only use that to bring in, but it's kind of hard to bring in something like that without adding volume. I've just learned to accept it. So when I'm mixing my drums with the other instruments, I bring in parallel compression pretty early on in the process. So let's take a look at the parallel compression track and just play it by itself. So this track, I have the kick and snare routed to it. Sometimes I'll route the toms to this as well. A lot of the times I don't need it. Toms are pretty boomy and punchy on their own, just with EQ and compression most of the time. Every once in a while, I will move those over. I don't put anything that has a cymbal or a hi-hat or a crash or anything like that, any of the high frequencies into this channel. This is just a parallel compression track soloed. It's not much all by itself. It's kind of just brings a little bit of emphasis to the kick, brings some emphasis of the snare drum, and that's about it. So let's take a look at these plugins here. The first one, I was using the Kramer HLS channel, and as you saw in this video up here, I'm leaving waves, I'm going to other plugins. So this is the Pre-DD by Analog Obsession. It's the preamp section of what the HLS is modeled after, the Type 69 EQ. It adds a little bit. In fact, let me play kind of a before and after on this. It's subtle. It's very subtle. In fact, what you'll notice through all these channels is everything is really subtle here. I'm not adding big, huge things. I'm adding a lot of little bitty things. So I take the fine gain, I put it all the way up. I put a little bit of output, and I take the voltage gain and put it just up a little bit. I'll do it before and after. You really can't hear much. It's very, very subtle, but it feeds into the compressor and then it really kind of takes off from there. For compression, I'm using the SSL native. You can use almost any compressor. I like the SSL bus compressor because it's just, that's kind of what it was meant for. You can use 1176. You can probably use the LA2A. DBX 160 is really good. Recomp would work very well for this. In fact, there is a preset called something like master bus that you can use, kind of tweak that out and get it to sound right. So we'll do you won't really do it before and after because it doesn't really make sense, because it's the difference here is a lot in volume and in body and everything. But for the settings, I'm putting the TAC at 10 milliseconds, the release at 0.1. I can also do the release at auto, just depending on the sound and how it sounds. And the ratio is at 10, and I put the makeup gain all the way up. And then I bring the threshold down. I'm getting somewhere between 10 and 20 dB of gain reduction, depending on the song, depending on how much I think it needs. So with this on, you can just hear it just slamming it, and it's getting a ton of compression in there. What I do is for the sends from each the kick and the snare, I do these as a pre-fader send. And right now in this song, I have both of the snare and the kick at the same 0 dB volume. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll have one that's louder than the other, and I will adjust the volume so that they're hitting, so that needle hits the same thing for both kick and snare as it goes in. And I'm using a pre-fader send there because I want the level going into the parallel compressor to not be affected by any of the effects or any of the faders or any of the things that I'm doing on the individual tracks themselves. And I found for parallel compression that works best. All of the other sends that we're going to go into are post-fader, just the default setting. Next, I put some EQ on it. It's just a very simple high pass and low pass. I want to get all of that thump out of there. So I would do the high pass up at 150, and I want to get, like, if there's any cymbal bleed or anything like that coming through, I do the low pass all the way up at like almost 6500K, or 6500 hertz, I should say, 6.5K, just to get some of the wash out of there, because that can come through pretty aggressively. So we listen to before and after just the EQ. You can hear that it sounds, it takes away all that like low end. I don't want any low end rumble coming in here. I just want that definition of the kick and the definition of the snare to come in. And then finally, I just put a limiter on the end of it, -3 ceiling, and just brought the threshold to happen to be -15 down. It brings, just kind of evens out everything. And with the limiter, it's hitting it pretty hard. I have a ton of compression going on here, and I like the way it sounds. So then what I'll do, and we'll do this here live, the fader's at just about -3. What I'll do is I'll solo out the drums, I'll take the fader and put it all the way down, and then play it, and then just bring the fader up until where I feel it sounds good. And then I'll mute it a couple times on and off just to see how it sounds and how much is bringing in. I think that sounds pretty good right there. Now, if I were forced for some reason, if I had limitation in my DAW or what, some magical weird challenge that only lets me use one send track, it would be parallel compression for drums. This is the one that has most effect and the most change over the drums that I use. All the other ones are very, very subtle, and we're adding in just a little bit just to kind of enhance things. Parallel compression is probably a, 40% change, whereas all the others are like 5 to 10% change if you're putting it into that weird thing that doesn't really exist. Let's move on to the next one. I'm going to leave the compression on for this one, and I'm kind of just add them one at a time as we go on. The next one is the drums exciter. And what I'm doing there is I'm bringing in harmonic frequencies into things like the snare, sometimes I'll use the toms, always the overheads, sometimes a room mic, just to kind of bring out those things that have more of the highs. I want to bring out more of those frequencies without the harshness of just a straight EQ. So if we solo just this track, most of the sends that I shoot through are at 0 dB unity gain, but the snare I found it can get really kind of out of control if I do that. So I brought this all the way down to like -9 dB. It doesn't do a whole lot, just kind of adds a little bit extra. And the plugins on this, I'm using the brand new Toucan Exciter Plus sub. Take a look at the link up here for my playlist for the Toucan plugin suites. As the time I'm recording this, there's only 2 videos. As he releases more plugins, I'm probably going to do more videos on them. I will add them to this playlist. So take a look at that. The exciter, I was using the Waves Vintage Exciter. I think this sounds just as good. It's a little bit different, but I think it works really well. I have the frequency over at 3.2 or so kHz, and I have the mix somewhere about, I don't know, what would this be, 40% maybe? I'm not using the fat bottom part of it at all. And then I put some EQ on. I just do a high or a low pass to kind of shelf off the really, really, really highs over 9K. And then I'm putting a limiter, which probably never gets hit. I just put this at a -1, so it never actually clips. And if anything happens to go there, but the levels aren't coming through loud enough for this to really be a problem. So let's do the drum set with before and after the exciter. And I'll just play all of the drums and we'll see what it sounds like. It brings in something. It's definitely there. It's a little bit subtle. And like I said, all of these are going to be subtle from now on. And I do the same method I did for parallel compression, which I'm not going to do this. I just showed you on the one track. I bring the volume all the way down and then just bring it up. What I tend to do for these is I bring it up just so you can hear it a little bit, and then I back off just a little bit. I do a mute test on and off to make sure I'm not doing too much. I don't want these to really alter the sound of my drums. I want this to more enhance it. Next channel is the clipper, and this is exactly what it sounds like. This is essentially distortion. Right now I'm using it on the kick and snare in this song. I will sometimes bring the toms in, but that's it. I don't want to bring anything else in. Just want to bring the kick and snare and see what I can get out of that. In this track, just alone by itself. You can hear just the kind of breaking up of the kick, and the snare kind of just opens up in more of a psh kind of sound. For plugins on this channel, I'm using the Barrier by KIT Plugins. It's a free saturation plugin. It can do anything from your subtle, like airy tape saturation things to like full on, way over the top distortion. There's a high cut and a low cut and a mix knob. I like the way it sounds, and I've kind of adjusted this to get a kind of a decently distorted but yet tame sound out of this. Next, I'm using the SSL channel strip. There's some frequencies I want to enhance, and there's I want to add a little bit of compression, actually a bit of compression. So I'm doing like a 3.5 high shelf at 9K, doing a 4 dB at 7K. I'm doing a almost 4 dB cut at 300 hertz. That's kind of that boxy, not very good sounding in drums or anything for that matter. I'm doing a 3 dB at 60 hertz, and then I'm doing a lot of compression, like a 27:1 ratio. I just kind of dialed it up to see what it would sound like. Getting somewhere in the 6 to 10 dB of gain reduction, and then a little bit of input to kind of drive the whole thing. And that just kind of emphasizes some of these frequencies I want to stick out. And then at the end, a limiter, kind of doing it to squash it, kind of doing it to make sure it doesn't clip. So we'll do before and after with the kit. This is going to be really hard to hear. I have it at a really low volume. Actually, it's like -20. I don't want it to overpower. And this song specifically, because there's no distorted guitars in the song. If there is distorted guitars in the song that I use, I will probably put more of this in, but for this song with only clean guitars, I wanted to keep it back just a little bit. So we'll do before and after the kit alone. Like I said, it's very subtle. It's probably very hard to pick up in this particular song. But let me just crank this up, and you can kind of hear what it would do to a song here. You can just hear it starting to take over. The kick is just starting to break up. I kind of like that sound, but again, with no distorted guitar, it's really hard to kind of hide that, and I think it would stick out too much in this song. Let's go to the next one. It's called Max Bass. I stole this name directly from Brandon's video. He's using the Waves R Bass, which is something I did use, but Analog Obsession has this plugin called Love End. And it's kind of almost exactly what R Bass is doing. I have the frequency at 60. I have for some reason, the boost at 9.5 instead of 10. If it went to 11, I would do that, but since it's only at 10, 9.5 is fine. And I'm only routing the kick to this channel because all I want is the thump of the kick. So this alone by itself. And if I have any cards left, I'll put a card up here. Otherwise, I'll put a link in the description for one of the early videos I did in this channel well over a year ago of how to get like a sub kick or sub bass on your kick. The R Bass is one of the methods that I use. There's also a couple others. I really like this plugin. I'm going to keep this on my channel moving forward. And then again, I put the fader down and I kind of bring up the volume until I like it. So let's do before and after this. And again, it's going to sound like a broken record. It's very, very subtle. I'm not going to add giant amounts of this. I'm going to do it just to bring in that kind of thump and the low end and the whoomp whoomp kind of thing going on to enhance the kick. The next channel here is the Drum Punch. And what this is doing is this is emphasizing the kick and the snare frequencies. So it's soloed. It's very subtle. I'm using the JS Transient controller. I put the attack at 100%. What this does is you have your waveform that looks like that. It just stretches it. So it makes the peaks more dramatic and more enhanced. And then I can pull those peaks with some EQ. So I'm using re-EQ. I have two bands here. One is at 80 hertz of 12 dB. One is at 1K of 13.2 dB because that's where it wound up. It's for some reason. Don't ask me. It's only my project, or maybe ask me, or I got no answer for you. But these are just EQ bumps just to accentuate those. And then because I'm doing such a large EQ, I'm doing a brick wall limiter with relimit just to get some of those extra things out. Do a quick before and after. And again, broken record. Second to last channel is the gated verb. Now, this is not the 80s. We're not like Phil Collins, like, dun-dun, 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 dun, that kind of stuff. This is just a very, very slight effect. In fact, just the channel alone soloed. And I'm routing kick and snare to it. Every once in a while, I'll route the toms to it, but I think the toms have enough with my room reverb to sound good in this song as it is. And again, it's very subtle. So plugins for this, I'm using the SSL Native Flex Verb. This went on sale a while ago for 30 or 40 bucks. It has plates, it has chambers, it has rooms, it has halls, and it has a lot of stuff. There's like this crossover feature, there's a 6-band EQ. Then I use Regate, and I just use the default settings when you first open Regate, and I brought the threshold down until it's kind of snapping off. It's bringing in more of the kick, but it's kind of snapping off the snare. So we'll do a before and after of the whole kit with just the gated verb, and I'll, mute it on and off. It's very subtle. It brings out just to kind of enhance a little boominess, but more like you're taking your drum set and move it into like a hardwood floor as opposed to your carpeted sound deadened studio. Last track we have to look at is the drum plate. Normally, I wouldn't do a separate send for only one instrument. I would just put the effect on the instrument itself. But I kind of followed what Brandon had going on, and I thought maybe in the future there would be a point I could use this somewhere else. So far I haven't, but I'm going to keep it on a separate track. I kind of like the way it just plays in there. And like I said, I only send the snare to this, and right now it's at like a -6 dB. So I kind of bring this in for how I like it to sound. Again, I'm using the SSL native flex verb. I'm using a plate setting. I started with this London Oxford plate preset, and I just kind of adjusted from there. I'm not using the EQ in this one because I am using re-EQ afterwards, and all I'm doing in this is I'm taking a high pass up at like 250-ish and a low pass way up at 20K, which you're not going to really hear that anyway. I just kind of left it on my default. So just this channel alone, it's just a snare. And it does give a pretty good verb. I'm using more of the room reverb to get all of my reverb in the drum kit alone. I just want this to kind of accentuate and kind of bring it out. So let's play the kit with this on and off. Brings the snare out, it gives it more reverb, it gives it a little bit more body and a little bit more of that reverb tail without being like a total 80s, like almost where it sounds like an artificial drum sound. So that is all of my drum sends. Now, before I said each one is a little bit subtle, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave the drum compression, the parallel compression on, and I'm going to mute these other 6, and we'll go back and forth, and then I'll play them in the mix like that. So let's do the same test with the entire mix. I'm going to leave the parallel compression on the whole time, and I'll just kind of unmute and mute these sends. So you can see it really brings out the punch, the body, kind of the I hate to say like a width, but there is some things that are kind of affecting the stereo width in here, kind of just accentuating things. All right, so that is it. What did you think of this? Do you use parallel compression, parallel processing, we should say, on your drums? If so, which one of these do you use? Which one do you use that I'm not using? Which ones of mine that you saw that would you like to use? Just give me some comments. I thought we've had really good feedback between you guys and me in the last couple videos, especially with the Toucan plugins. I'd like to hear what you guys have to think. Notice I'm not using any sampler replacements here. These are all natural drums recorded over 20 years ago, and I think they pretty much stand up the test of time. Anyway, I'd like to hear from you. Leave me a comment, like, share, subscribe, do the little bell, all the YouTube stuff that we talk about. And until next time, have yourselves an amazing week. In the distance, they see this tree, and it looks like there's pieces of baking hanging from it. Baking. That's sufficiently terrible.